Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Clare, author of Simplified. Leadership is simple, you lead people. Dave, welcome to the show.
Paul, absolute privilege to be here. Thank you so much.
It is a pleasure, my friend. Are you ready to get started?
I am born ready.
All right, question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Great question. My one piece of advice, since I'm a first-time author who has just finished writing their book and getting it out there, would be get your voice and your message clear, and then also understand your goal for the book. What is your voice and your message, and what is the goal for the book itself? I think that's really important to understand, because there's two goals, I believe, for your book. One is a great marketing strategy for you, and the other is a vehicle for your voice and your message. For me, my book was to be a vehicle for my voice and message, which determined my strategies going forward on how I wanted to market or promote or utilize the book in anything moving forward for me.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Getting noticed. Well, firstly, actually, I would have to say before that is determining, when we say getting published, if we're talking about like by a publisher, would be definitely getting noticed. But once again, to me, it's determining whether you need a publisher or want a publisher or not. But if you've decided that you do, then it's how do you get on their radar?
And that's going to transition perfectly into our next question. And that is to please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Yeah, well, so I determined that I did want a publisher because I wanted an exponential reach with my book, not just something for myself, as it's my voice and vehicle, message for my vehicle. I wanted to make sure I could get as many hands as possible. So based on that, I decided I needed a publisher. And the way I went about it is I had a wonderful testimonial for my book from one of the most astute and well-read men on leadership here in Australia, Professor Gary Martin, which ended up becoming the foreword of my book. And once I got that, and certainly it gave me wonderful belief in what I'd written, if that's what one of the most astute, well-read men in Australia felt about my book, then it must be pretty good. So I started actually tweeting out. I started with his testimonial on Twitter, and I found 4 publishers that I really wanted, that I thought would work well with me in terms of what I wanted in terms of a publisher, because I was making important to find the publisher that suits you, because you can find any publisher. And I picked 4 that I wanted to go after. And I would just put a tweet out every day with that and tag the 4 people. If this is what the most well-read person in Australia thinks about my book, I wonder what it would take to get it published. And then tag the 4 publishers. And then I got another quote from a friend of mine who's another best-selling author, and put that up and did the same thing. And then I got one from another wonderful testimonial from one of Australia's top keynote speakers. And I said, if this is what this person thinks, what would it take to get it published? And I just kept tweeting for a couple of weeks, putting these things out. And then lo and behold, I got a tweet back, response to one of my tweets. It said from Morgan James publisher, who's actually picked the book up, saying, okay, Dave, let's talk. So I proactively just went after them.
So how many tweets did it take, and how long did it take to get their attention?
I would imagine it may not sound like it. It was quite annoying to some of them, I'm sure. If I did the math, it was over 2 weeks to get Morgan James' attention. And that was probably close to 40 tweets I would have been putting out in 2 weeks. Just to get their attention. But it's quite funny, because once I got their attention, it's kind of like, as soon as I got their attention, I got a bunch of other people's attention too. But they're the ones I really wanted, which worked out beautifully in the end.
Well, and I think you've just talked about a prime example of persistence paying off.
Oh, absolutely. Because I wanted to find a publisher, and I could sit back and hope that one would find me, but I wanted to get myself on the ones I wanted's radar, and that's certainly whether you use the tweet strategy or whether, I'm sure there's multiple strategies. I just didn't know anybody in that world, and a lot of my friends who have published books have self-published. I was the first one really to go after an actual publisher, so I had no clue. But I did have belief in my book, and I'm pretty well known for being a persistent bugger. So, yeah, I just applied what I knew well, and it worked.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Absolutely. My favorite book, and I've had this book with me everywhere I go since it was first published back in 2003. What I would do is I would write in it, make notes in it, and then when I'm done with it, I would hand it off to someone else, and then I would go buy another copy of it. So I've always had a copy of it, and I actually now have an original copy of it signed by the author himself as I build this up. And it is reimagined by Tom Peters. So Reimagine was a book that he wrote back in 2003, Business Excellence in a Disruptive Age. And it's quite funny. They called him, the Economist called Tom Peters the Uber Guru. And reason why, for me, is Tom Peters' book, and you please appreciate that this was written in 2003, and I'll take a couple of quotes out of it, which aren't necessarily my favorites, but if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less, and it's all about embracing the uncertainty. So in this book, Tom Peters wrote about all the disruption that's happening in the world. This was before Uber, before the iPod was invented, before Airbnb, before Netflix, before all this. He predicted all this stuff would be happening. And I actually have in my hands my signed copy because I got to see Tom speak here in Perth in Australia a few months ago, and I got to spend some one-on-one time with him and actually to thank him for allowing me, or for writing this book, and it inspired me to do the work that I do today.
Well, I was going to ask about your favorite quote and why, but I think you discovered it.
No, actually, I have another favorite quote.
Let's do it.
Okay, actually, my actual favorite quote is, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough, which is the opening quote in my book, and also why my book is called Simplified, which is obviously a quote by Albert Einstein. And would be my advice to any author out there is, if you're going to write something, there's a lot of authors who can write in complexity, but I would challenge you, whatever your subject is that you're writing, is to find a way to explain it very simply.
Excellent. Well, Dave, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The simplest way, just go to my website, and it has all my social media links on it. But my website is complicated in its own right, www.daveclare.com. That's as complicated as it gets.
Well, Dave, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.